I put it down and went back to drawing and painting because I wanted to synthesize images. And I wanted to make images that were clear in my mind's eye out in the world, and I needed to draw them in order to do that because I didn't have Photoshop. I was using photographs as reference. Again, that was one of the primary reasons I got into it, to make reference for photorealistic representations of a more visionary nature. And when Photoshop came along, I realized the drawings could become, the photographs. Well, do you see where it starts? Where does it start? Usually it starts with an idea. It could be verbal or it could be in pen. And then I may make a drawing, and from that find the right photographic material. Either go out and photograph it or look at my archive that I already have and find ways of piecing this together. And then I realized that instead of making a final drawing, that I could make a photo-based final image. And that was one of the first things that I was exploring in Photoshop, working through that process. So it really was a natural extension of what I was trying to do. And I found that much as I really appreciated photographs that could speak in metaphor, like I celebrated Dad's Galaxy Apple, its ability to speak in metaphor. Again, the three things that really got me for photography when I was exploring it: standing side by side with photographers using the same tools and realizing we all made very different images. The machine was not in control of the process. It didn't necessarily generate the final product. It very much influenced it. I mean, it wasn't the same as Dad's mark versus my mark, but it was very much Dad's image and my image, or whoever else I was standing next to. Second, that literal representations could be so abstract. Siskind was particularly challenging to me. This is a photograph. It represents what the world is, but it looks like an abstract painting. It doesn't look anything like even paper on wall, or paint. This is really, how does that happen? How does that transformation happen? And more importantly, certain images spoke in metaphor. I mentioned Weston's Pepper. Like Minor White says, I photograph a thing not only for what it is, but for what else it is. And it was Dad's Galaxy Apple that really epitomized that. A simple apple photographed against a dark ground with white spots generally is read by most viewers as a cosmos, as a galaxy. And that macrocosm, microcosm was a metaphor that resonated with me in particular, that a dandelion could look like a sun or a star. So to find the immense in the particular, to find the universal in the mundane, the sacred in the profane, was the one that resonated most with me. And so learning to work in that mode and finding how often that happened, which wasn't that often, and happened more frequently when I was able to construct an image, I found that photography alone, as existed at that time, the selected image alone wasn't enough for me. Photoshop allowed me to trade in all of it. And then I realized that having been trained as a writer in college and understanding offset from my experience with my mother, and later even doing some of that myself for my own work or even for other publications and museums, that being trained as a photographer from my father, to be able to hybridize all of that created a tremendous synergy. It was really interesting to be at lunch with Dad and Ansel and Jerry Ullsman at this. They're all teaching workshops in Yosemite, and Dad and Ansel are going on with each other. The pre-visualization and the rest of it. And Dad, likes to tease. Once in a while, he says, "Well, Ansel, if you can pre-visualize, you deserve what you get." And Ansel's problem was he was taking Dad seriously. He starts backtracking and qualifying all that I just said about pre-visualization. Come on, that's why I came up with negative his score and print his performance. And I'm watching Jerry do all of this stuff, and they get on the music, and he's like, Jerry, how does Jerry describe his thing? What's this guy got to say? Because his process is radically different. Interesting, And they're trading piano tips as well. Dad's going on about Chopin, and Ansel's going on about Mozart and technique and all the rest of it. Jerry's finally getting antsy. He says, "Yeah, my player piano playing is better when I take my socks off." So it became really clear to me, why, to some degree, Jerry kind of coined the phrase, and I think he is responsible for coining the phrase, post-visualization. And you go into Jerry's studio, and you see all these contact sheets, all the negs scattered around with a light table, grease pencils. I mean, you're going to see it. 8 enlargers. He's got his music. He's got his smoke. His stogies. And he's having a great time. Blues and cigars, and this whole process. And I remember Ed Raney, a good friend of mine, a photographer, was teasing me out on the prairie, out at his ranch one time, early on in my career. And like, fragments. It's all fragments. You digital photographers can't take a whole picture. Like, well, yeah, Jerry is deliberately shooting fragments. You isolate the actor. You shoot stages. Generally, the stages want to be open enough to be able to contain something that's heard. One of the things that you'll find as you're shooting for composites that if you make a finished image that's all tightly packed, there's no room for putting anything else in there. All right? So there are different types of strategy. You end up selecting differently, end up shooting a little differently as a result of that. I think that's entirely different from what I would call visualization, and I'm saying that in opposition to pre-visualization and post-visualization. I'm only using that term because, okay, here are these guys, and what I mean is, like the blank page, the things the writer or the composer or anybody else, like, how do you get things started ex nihilo, from nothing? Like, here's a page, fill it. You don't get to do the camera, you're not looking at something else out there. Like, what goes on? Do you start with a word? Freedom? Make me a picture of freedom. How different would that be for all of us?
Liberty leading the people.
All right, sure. Man completely suspended in the air, skydiving. It could be anything, right? So many ways of interpreting that, and we might have started with a word. So there are parallels in modern physics. Mm-hmm. We do experiments. Is light a particle or a wave? Mm-hmm. It ought to be particularly interesting to photographers. Right? And if we ask the question, is it a particle? Yeah, it's a particle. If we ask the question, is it a wave? Yeah, we get a wave response. But we think it's physically impossible for something to exhibit both characteristics. It can't be one or the other. It has to be a field of possibility, or it has to be a concrete thing. Right? Yeah, modern physics is kind of disrupting all of that. And so we also understand that, to some degree, we're implicated in what unfolds. So that sense of connectedness, of interdependency, of co-creation is very much on my mind, both from religious practices, readings in Zen and Buddhism, and from modern physics. I'm very much influenced by both, and in fact, both fields are influencing each other. The Dalai Lama is talking about modern physics, and modern physicists are very much turning towards looking at Eastern traditions there as well. Interesting interchange, interesting dialogue. That's the time in the world that I'm growing in. It's curious.